Hello YouTube. So we are still waiting for the Cummins motor for the 715 to come back to the shop, but we've got some time and we're going to go ahead and try to make some boxes of parts disappear today. So what we're working on is we're actually back on the rear axle for the 715, finishing up some stuff that we didn't do when we did the original gear setup. In this case, we're going to be rebuilding the hubs and doing a brake upgrade. This is a 2002 Dodge Dana 80 rear axle from a 1-ton truck. It turns out that we can do essentially a bolt-on upgrade to the 2003 Plus brake system, which is a little bit bigger rotors, a little bit bigger calipers. And since this was a relatively short run for Dodge, the opportunity to upgrade to the newer brake parts are actually a little bit better supported and have better availability. So that's what we're up to. I've got this side torn down, and join us as we tear down the other side. And I mean, left side is the same as the right, so we'll do one and then do the other. And I apologize for the background noise on the heaters. It is 30 degrees outside today here in November. It is what it is. All right, so starting the teardown for this upgrade. This here is on the driver's side of the axle. Passenger side is the same, but it's just teardown. So we need to start by taking the brake caliper off. Then we need to remove the disc, the brake rotor, and then the teardown on the inside. There are 2 bolts that are the caliper bracket bolts, and we can take those off directly, and then the whole assembly comes off. These are a 21 millimeter. And probably more than a little bit of Loctite on those. Take those off. Take the brake caliper off. Now, if you're doing this upgrade, this is your core or leftover parts for something else. You can do this on the vehicle. I just happen to not have this axle installed at the moment. Once that's off, take the rotor off. Now, if you wanted to just do the brake upgrade, you could take care of any updates to your parking brake you need and proceed on. I'm also going to rebuild the hub. So now I want to remove the hub because that'll give me better access to the parking brake material anyway. So for this you need to remove the 8 bolts that are here at the end of the axle shaft. And then remove the axle shaft. Now, there is this locking key right here. This locking key here, job is to prevent the axle nut from backing off. So now you need to remove this key. A couple of different ways you could do that. I'm going to try a vice grips and see if I can pull that off. Just like that. Set that aside, you do not want to lose it. This is a 2 1/16 inch spindle nut socket. Normally I would expect these to be more than hand tight. This one seems not to be the case. Although this spindle, this holds the hub on, it also sets the preload on your bearings. So normally the torque on these is not real crazy, but I would expect more than hand tight. Now with that, and set that into your oil pan. That will continue to drip for a bit, and now you have access to the brake shoe assembly. I'm filming, so I don't necessarily need to do separately, but I would recommend taking a picture of this drum brake assembly before you take it apart. It'll make it much easier to be able to put it back together again later if you know where all the pieces go. I am not going to reuse the shoes or any of the hardware in here, so I just need to disassemble it and be able to put it back together again later. In this case, push in, rotate, and if you rotate the right amount, the retaining clip comes off. Repeat for the other side. Retaining clip comes off. And my brake hardware kit has replacements for these pins, but I never throw them away until it's actually put together. Now, I want to remove the shoes. And this can be done via whatever method suits your ability to get them disconnected from the mechanism up here. Whether you want to expand the spring or just rotate and work them off. And that is the removed brake shoe assembly. I will leave that as it is because that makes it easier to replicate putting the other one back together. So now just doing some cleanup with the spindle. Remove the grease and dirt. A little bit of brake clean goes a long way. Also want to look for any issues with the sealing surface back in here or the bearing surfaces elsewhere. Okay, next up we want to prepare this hub, which means removing the old bearing, and on the back side removing the seal and the bearing. I have a seal puller tool that actually works pretty well on these. Being able to get in here and pop the seal out. That allows you to remove the bearing. Now we need to drive out the races. This is oil bathed, so everything in here at this point is covered in gear oil. Take a punch, line it up on the race on the opposite side, and drive it out.
There's the race.
Flip it over and repeat on the other side. Once it starts moving, you get a little bit more purchase to drive against. Oh, fun. That one is trying to say it needs to be driven all the way up, like that. And there's the other race. Clean up your tools before you put them away. We're done extracting seals. Okay, go back to our parts list from Rock Auto and begin the reassembly of our seal and hub based upon what part goes where. Okay, we're going to do our outers first. This is a set 38. Remember, these are tapered bearings. So you want to set that in there more or less like so. Before we do that, for those that are trying to keep track, the outer was an 80 millimeter disc and the inner is a 100 millimeter. It does take a large seal driver set to do this. So, running into a slight issue with the parts ordered from Rock Auto. The inner wheel bearings and inner seals are clearly not the right part for this hub. They don't fit. I'm going to check and see what came out. So, clean up the old bearings. We'll see what they were, and we'll go to the store and get the same parts. Okay, off to the parts store.
2 hours later.
Back from our visit to the auto parts store. Turns out, without running all over Denver, we've got a little bit of a delay, so we're gonna get the rest of our bearings and get those put together. Now, the next item on our to-do list, however, is to assemble the parking brake. And the easiest way of doing that is to just mirror the old assembly with the new. So what we're going to do is take our new brake hardware and assemble it onto the new shoes to match the old. That's one of the advantages of taking it off the way we did without pulling all the springs and everything apart. So we can start with the biggest spring of the mess, which is this blue one, and we can look at how the existing spring is oriented, which appears to be more or less like this and into that hole. So hooking this in, and we start with this big spring because it makes life easier. In theory, it makes life easier. And we can kind of wrap it around and get the big one in place. Now we have our adjuster. And the adjuster goes in here in the same orientation as the existing one and drops into those two slots. We set this last spring, which is this little green one. Again, same orientation relative to the adjuster. And we just need to stretch it enough to get it hooked in place. And just like that, we have the new assembly ready to put onto the axle. There we go.
Victory!
Victory. All right, we got the spring back in here. We took this pin out. Then we were able to hook that spring in where it went on this end, hook it in where it goes on this end, and then wrap it around. Let's get the adjuster in here first. Here we go. Okay, so we've got the retainers in, top spring is in, adjuster is in. Now we just have to deal with this last spring. Actually, I think that spring's too stretched out. Damage here and here is too much. We'll have to reuse the old one. There we go. Finally. We'll try doing it on the other side and see if we can do a better job. New brake shoes, brake hardware in place. We'll adjust them once we put the hubs on and are starting to put the rotor on so that we can adjust the clearance with the rotor.
The next day.
Back from the parts store with the correct bearings and seals. We'll go ahead and finish assembling the hub. So this is the Timken 28622 race. It just drops down into the hub. We'll kind of square it up as best we can with the 95mm driver. Just like the race on the other side. Always much easier if you're driving these things straight. You want to make sure you get it all the way in there. Always feel it change when it bottoms out. So that's the race. Now on this side, we're going to install the bearing, which is the 28682. This is out of a 2002 Dodge with the diesel engine and manual transmission. We don't want to put this in dry per se. We'd always like to have these bearings be lubricated or pre-lubricated. It is an oil bathed axle. So what we're going to do is just set that in place, trying not to make a big mess along the way here. Because we've got the cold hub and actually a warm bearing because it just came from being in a conditioned space. It makes it a little harder to drive some of this stuff. Okay, so that just gets some oil on that bearing. So now we're going to take our seal. Technically, it's got this red stuff around it, so you're not supposed to have to apply additional, but I always find that I have better luck if I apply just a thin film of RTV to the outside of these. It doesn't need to be very much. It just always seems like I get better results of whatever gouges or scrapes might have occurred in the seal housing. Remember, when you're putting in these seals, the spring always goes towards the oil, and on this axle the oil is on that side. So again, you just set that up. Now, I could use the same 95mm driver, but I actually just want to drive this flush because that's where it was when it came off. So I'm actually going to opt for a little bit bigger driver so that I don't overdrive the seal. And that was the 105. Clean up extra goop as you go. Time to put the hub on the spindle. Now again, this is not something we want to do dry, so we're going to apply a little bit of oil directly to the seal here and help lubricate the seal on as it slides on. And we're going to apply a little bit, just a film, to the surfaces on the axle. We don't want it so much that it drips, but just enough to help lubricate everything as it goes together. And definitely don't want to get oil in here in the middle of your brand new brakes. That'll just make it that much easier, less potential to tear the seal or cause other damage. Making sure that you've got your outer bearing ready, because you're going to want this in just a moment. And the same argument should be pre-lubricated. So now take your spindle or your hub and slide it over the spindle. Not cooperating at all. Just a slight interference fit with the bearings on the spindle. And again, we have the situation of a warm bearing and a cold spindle, so things are not necessarily fitting as nice and easy as they will. So we're just going to use a soft-faced dead blow hammer to persuade the bearings to seat. Just like that. Make sure your inner bearing is in place. Okay, so now we put in our spindle nut. Put this in place, paying attention to this keyway that exists right here. That's going to be important to us when we go to reinstall the locking tab. Okay, now as we tighten the spindle nut, we want to continue to rotate the bearings. Make sure the bearings have the opportunity to seat. The torque spec on this is 120 to 140 foot-pounds, and then back off 1/8 of a turn. I need an adapter. However, you see that I've now reached a problem. The best way to solve this problem, if your axle is attached to the truck, you won't have this issue. If your axle is not attached to a truck, you're going to borrow your handy-dandy assistant and ask them to hold the pinion for you while you do this. Okay. That's my 130 foot-pounds. That is still rotating. Now we need to back it off 1/8 of a turn. I don't want to use the torque wrench for that, so I will grab my 1/2-inch ratchet. From there to there was 1/4. From here to here is 1/8. Okay, let's do this a different way because it's not moving exactly.
Hi, Mark.
Okay, raise it up.
No, I'm trying.
Here you go. Okay, so now, and that's 1/8 turn. At this point, we have the hub reinstalled, torqued. Now we need to install our locking tab. So the little locking tab goes in the keyway. Just locate it, and then you need to drive it in. I'm going to grab a punch so I can drive it without mangling it. Nice soft brass punch. This is really only going into kind of a nylon sort of ring. Just want to try to avoid mangling it and just drive it in straight. And that keeps it from backing off. Normally you would install a gasket or some RTV on this ceiling flange. I'm not ready to do that just yet because I expect to take this apart again. However, I'm going to go ahead and install the axle flange just to get it and the associated parts out of my way. Sliding it in, locating the splines in the center section of the differential like that. And reinstall your bolts. Again, normally if you were going to do a permanent install, lock tight these so they don't back off. Okay, now we're ready to install our new rotor and adjust our parking brake. Start by cleaning things up. We want to make sure that we removed all the dirt and everything else from the inside where this is going to be mated. Actually using a brake clean to clean a brake. Okay, now this is going to probably be on and off a few times as we adjust the parking brake. But the idea here is to adjust it till we get just a slight bit of drag with the parking shoes on the rotor. So our initial fit. Definitely no drag. So we take it out, locate a screwdriver, and tighten the parking adjuster a little bit. A lot of different ways that this can be done. This is convenient when it's in this state. All right, so adjust a little, test fit again, adjust a little more. Still no drag. Tighten it up some more. A little bit more. As I go, I am kind of trying to readjust and recenter the shoe so that it looks like it's about evenly spaced on both sides of the flange here. Might be starting to get close. Okay, after 3 or 4 more adjustments, we're now to a point where it doesn't want to slide on anymore. So we know we've gone just a little bit too far. So now we're going to back it off. So now it slides on, but it's clearly too tight. So back it off a little bit more still. All right, a little too tight, a little too loose, then a little bit too tight. Now just a little bit of drag. If it's still turning free, we're gonna call that just right. Now we need to install our caliper. These are our brake caliper mounting bracket bolts. I'm going to apply some Loctite so they don't back off on us. I do use blue Loctite for almost everything. These are trail rigs. I want to be able to take them apart on the trail without requiring a torch. This is our caliper. This is probably going to work best if we load the caliper. I'm going to separate the caliper from the caliper bracket to allow us to load the caliper with the brake pads. It is important if you're doing this conversion that you do buy a caliper that comes with the caliper bracket, because it is a different caliper bracket for the larger setup. Caliper bracket. Slide. And the other slide. Another set of slides. Slide grease. Brake pads. Doesn't take very much. Now, get rid of your greasy glove before you start messing with your brake pads. With your slide pins greased up, go ahead and load the caliper with your new brake pads. Here we go. Okay, caliper bracket is loaded. Locate the caliper bracket on the axle. We'll come back and torque these in just a minute. We're going to apply a little bit of the grease to the slide pins just to prevent corrosion. Always make sure the bleed screw is up when you install the caliper. Mind the orientation of the caliper when you put it in. It will only drop in one way because of the way the slides are set up. And with that, the caliper, the rotor is installed. The hub has been rebuilt, resealed. Make sure you put in your gaskets. And then all of this needs to be torqued to spec. 24 foot-pounds on the caliper slide pins and 100 foot-pounds on the brake caliper brackets. And that's done. All right, that finishes putting this side together. The other side is the same process. Exactly the same process. So with that, I think we're done putting this axle back together, putting the hub back together with this upgraded 2003 plus brake package. Again, it's just a bolt-on upgrade with a little bit bigger rotor, a little bit bigger caliper, a little bit more stopping power. Thank you for watching. If you like what we do us a favor, you know the drill. Like, subscribe, share.